Hello and welcome to another episode of Mastering Dungeons. I am back from my trip. I am Shawn Merwin. That is Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos.
Welcome
Glad to be
back,
back.
Master of
Thanks.
Probabilities.
Yes, or did not master many probabilities, but it was a good working trip. I got some
Wonderful.
work done both
Of
on
course you
my
did.
own and for Ghostfire, where I met a
Hmm.
couple of the
Mm.
Aussies, one
Right.
for the first time in person. So that was good to meet Cy, our production manager, and we are now ready to rock and roll on a new week of more game stuff.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. I managed to wash the windows of my house, which is no small feat.
Yep,
What else did I do? Oh, I released a video today, Success in RPGs on successful projects. And that was really fun.
sweet.
Hopefully, if people are listening, they might check it out. Because I'm like this close to where I start generating revenue because YouTube just keeps moving the goalposts. And
You just need one more listener, Teos. Just one, just two more listeners.
now, they even lied to me. They told me I needed one thing and then I didn't. I needed like three things. They're just so mean. So mean.
So mean. Well, you can check out Teos's video and help him toward his goal of making a penny on this sort of stuff. But in the meantime, we're going to get to our Mastering Dungeon show by talking about listener corners and what do our listeners have to say to us this week. We will start with Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, who talks to us on our Patreon Discord. And he asks, as an RPG designer, is it considered good growth to be familiar with different gaming systems or to be strongly familiar with one? What are the pros and cons of this? Teos, I
Mm.
will let you take this question to start.
This is one that be like I could answer this like every way. So like the answer is yes, but like
Mhm.
it is really good to know other games. And I think that you will have better ideas if you will create better work if you have exposure to more gaming systems.
Mhm.
You don't have to know a system perfectly to write for it, but you must have some depth with it, right? You've got to be able to think of the particular system that you're designing for. So kind of both things are true. Like you want to have exposure to all these other systems, but you like if you think fifth edition D&D, they have a specific way they talk about making a saving throw. And you need to know that language. And
Mhm.
how they do the uses per day of a magic item has a particular pattern to it and all these kinds of things. And so you want to know that. Otherwise, someone has to edit all your stuff because you don't know the language of it. And if you don't understand the cadence of combat or how encounters are typically structured, then that's going to be a problem. So you definitely need to have that understanding, that strength in the one. But your best designers out there, right? Like your James Intercassos, your Shawn Merwins, they play and try out lots of different systems so that there are all these neat ideas they can bring to the table. Even board games, card games, right? Understanding those kinds of different mechanics, like Will Doyle, right? He wrote an organized Adventures League adventure, an epic where he had in it sort of like social party game mechanics. He had kind of card game type mechanics, right? Like just that comes from that breadth, and that's how you get good at it. What do you think? And I didn't really talk
Yeah.
about cons. So I don't know what you think, Shawn.
No, I think what you said is exactly right. The pro is you get to see what's great and terrible about other systems and how people use those other systems.
Mm.
And the con is you may lose sight of the system that you're actually writing for if you're not careful, or you may, and I've seen people, and I was at this point at one point where you see cool things working in other systems and you try to bring that into the system that you are writing for without really understanding why it works in this system, but why that won't work in this system,
Mm.
or the work you need to do to get it to work from one system to another. So as later today, we'll go through Daggerheart some
Yeah.
more. Maybe we'll talk about some of these things that in Daggerheart, this is great. In fifth edition D&D, this doesn't work as written for these reasons. However, if you made these changes, you might get that same effect from it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there are RPGs that I've read that just like they or play that just like they unlock things, right? Like when you see how fate aspects work,
Mhm.
or fate collaborative world building in Dresden Files, or Knight's Black Agent's approach to investigative clues, right? The Van Pyramid, like things like that. Like you just,
Sure.
you know, like your brain just goes like, oh, I can do things this way, right? And I can do this in any system, right? 13th Age, we just had Rob Hainsey on. You know, there are all kinds of the one unique thing and how icons work. And all of that is just really powerful construction that creates better experiences, right? If you just can figure out how to bring it in. Yeah.
Yeah. And like the con, and we've talked about this several times, would be looking at other games initiative systems and thinking, oh, that's so cool that it changes the way the game plays and how the players interact with the game master and with each other. And then you try to port it into fifth edition and you realize, oh, we sort of need a cyclical initiative because
Yeah.
there are rules that focus on every time at initiative count 20, this happens, or it lasts for an entire turn instead of until the start of your next turn, then you need that. So that's a con is if
Yeah.
you get too far afield from the system that you're actually working in.
Yeah, it's a great point. People will bounce off of even like side initiative and things that are in the DMG as suggestions. You know, people will bounce off of that and go, I don't, can we just get back to what I know? So you have to be careful of that for sure.
Yeah, but it doesn't hurt to understand other games
Yeah.
because D&D at its core is a game system, and other games at their cores are game systems. So having an understanding of those different systems can't hurt
Yeah,
as long as you recognize the silo in which each of them lives.
for sure. For sure.
So thank you for that question, Marcelo. And now PT McKim via Patreon asks, the Dagger Heart GM advice is incredible and it really resonates with the feeling of Critical Role. One of the impressive things about performance DMs like Matt Mercer is their ability to describe an NPC or a scene in vivid detail. Sometimes I can come up with some nice descriptions on the fly and then have to find a way to remember them, but often I struggle with that. Preparing scenes and NPCs in advance can help, but that seems to contradict the idea of being fluid and flexible and not preparing too much. What do you two think about the right balance of prepared versus extemporaneous descriptions? Ooh, good question. So it's it's hard because different audiences are going to want different things. We have to always remember as we watch Matt Mercer and Brennan Lee Mulligan and all of the great performance game masters out there that they aren't running this game for their players. They're running this game with their players for an audience.
Yeah.
So the kinds of descriptions, the kinds of depth, details, voices, NPC things for them isn't what you're going to want to run for either a home game or a convention game with strangers because games need certain things as a mechanical game and storytelling vehicles need certain things. There is such a thing as too much information. If your players
Yeah.
want to play a game, you need to give them enough detail that they can interact with the game, and anything else can be good, but it risks being too much. Same thing with storytelling. If you're telling a story, you don't want the players or your listeners, your viewers, to lose track of the thread that you're trying to create. So
Hmm.
you can go into great detail about this character, this site, this monster, but if you then lose, or if the players lose the thread that you're trying to lead them down, you're doing them a disservice by all that extra description and
Yeah.
not necessarily a service.
And I think
What do you
that's,
think?
yeah, absolutely. And there's a balance there for us mortal DMs to have between striving to learn from entertainment DMs
Mhm.
and and what we, like don't push it too far to where you're just, that's not the kind of game that one can just run at your table, because not
Mhm.
everybody's trying to perform outwards, right? And you
Right.
don't really want that, usually. But also there are great techniques, and if you look at what Matt does, if you look at what Chris Perkins does, if you look at what Jeremy Crawford do, Jerry Holkins, you will see that they say very little, or they say only what they need to see that their players can play off of it,
Mhm.
and the players help fill that in. And it's more about trying to create that reaction as quickly as you can than it is
Mhm.
to provide an accurate full description of the scene. um, and it's really interesting. I mean, I love, if you watch Chris Perkins DM, and I think
Mhm.
he's a person who's not really striving for entertainment. It really is more of his style, like he started before any of this was about entertainment. um,
Right.
he spends a lot of time not talking
Mhm.
and just watching and observing, because he's good at setting things up for the players to run with it. And that's the skill that I think that is the key here in this type of a question. Is can you just give them the thing that matters, right? And if when I think of Matt Mercer, I think of moments where he'll say something like, and that person, I'm making this up, but and that NPC is holding something that you think belonged to your brother.
Mhm.
A short statement, and then but that statement is so loaded that things
Mhm.
then just carry their course because it's so story heavy. And that's the kind of thing that a game like Daggerheart's telling you to do, right? Bring in
Right.
things that matter. It's not about painting the perfect picture. Bring in things that matter, and your players will react to it, and you can sit back.
Yep. In fiction, there's this concept of flat versus round characters.
Mm.
E.M. Forster, in his essay book called Aspects of the Novel from like the 1920s, introduces this concept, whereas flat characters sort of represent a single trait,
Mm. Hmm.
and round characters have the full depth of a human person with all the conflicting emotions and backgrounds and so on. And when he wrote that, it was a lecture he gave, and then it was
Mm.
written. People sort of mistook that as, well, flat characters are bad and round characters are good. And then they later went on to say, no, that's not my point. Flat characters can be great because they represent this element that everything else plays off of. And if every character is this deep, rich, rounded character, but that richness doesn't add anything to the story, then it's wasted time. So I see these things as exactly that, right? It's okay to have flat characters where you just say, the money changer is in the corner of the bar counting money, right?
Hmm.
That represents wealth and greed. Boom, that's all you need to know. And then you can use that in the story. Now, if the character then becomes a important antagonist or friend to the party, then you can start digging in deeper and giving more description and doing that and showing the roundness of this, not just the concept of greed, but the concept of why someone may be greedy and
Right.
how that could change over time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Love it.
Uh, and so that's why you want to think about whether you spend that much time on the description. And it's the same thing for if you're describing an adventure area,
Hmm.
right? You don't want to describe the 27 things in the room. You want to describe the one or two things that the characters will want to then interact with to move the story
Yes.
forward.
Yeah. That was a fun thing I had to do in the Dwarven Forge project, because they would have enormous rooms.
Mhm.
And you can check out, the Dungeon of Doom, if you're curious about this. And you can see there are these enormous rooms. Some of them are really kind of like three rooms all in one kind of connected thing. And my job was to write the adventure around it. And what I, would try to do is exactly that because I didn't want to skip over things. There are these amazing features that they've built into the terrain. So those things have to matter. But I would try to sectorize them, right? And sort of say, like, there is this thing you can check out, and that thing you can check out, and that thing you can check out. And that's probably all you can handle. As you get to those things, you may see additional things, but I've got to break it into something that's manageable. And the other thing, which was kind of like something you were kind of referring to, which is that you don't want to undo what you're doing, right? So like if you've got a room that's all about fire, don't distract people by adding one sentence about water right off the top, because now maybe the room isn't fire, right? Like you don't want to undo the thing with some contradiction, even though contradiction is vital to the story and the interest of it. You need to kind of work that so it doesn't erode the overall theme, which should carry and be the strongest part.
Yeah. And it's, to be honest, it's the same with art in role-playing games. I came across this recently working on the Strange Hollow role-playing game book, where Emily Hare's wonderful art was presented. And, we had this discussion of what's important in this piece. And like one of the monsters had three eyes. And so that was its main difference between a lizard and this creature. So we want to put in a power that has to do with that third eye or something about that third eye. Now, if the monster has a third eye, four tails, right, spikes growing out of its back, and two horns that are on fire, that's cool visually. But in terms of the storytelling, then you feel as the game designer, okay, I need to make fire horns, a four tail attack, something with the eye. So and it becomes, you can still do it, but it becomes a little much then in terms of a game for the game master to have to remember all of that as they're running the stat block.
Absolutely. Yep, for sure.
So so thank you, Marcelo, and thank you, PT McKim, for those questions. And you can ask us questions or leave comments through a bevy of avenues, which we will talk about at the end of the show. But for now, we want to get into our news and commentary this week, starting with Chaosium adding 6 new staff members.
6 must be like how I bet they have to wait and hire 6 at a time. And maybe do that 3 times a year.
Yeah. Well, we'll start by saying congratulations to everyone hired, including Mike Merles, formerly D&D's lead, now the executive producer of role-playing games there. In addition, they added 3 additions to the board game side. Martina Maknica as a marketing lead, Artur McCukic as graphic designer. I'm sorry, McCookie. And Saza Redwin, game developer. Also, VT developer Lance Jackson and digital content team Lucien Impala. All of those fine folks have been added to the staff at Chaosium. That's a lot of people to hire for a role-playing game company.
It really is, and it makes you wonder sort of what this entails, right? Call of Cthulhu is often the 3rd largest RPG in terms of sales at gaming stores, as gets reported by ICV2. That seems pretty consistent since it's happened, so many times for so many years. But Chaosium also does a lot of board games, and so we have 3 of these hires are board game side, so maybe they're seeing some success there, despite the overall board game market being a tougher one than it has been, certainly since the pandemic, but maybe even arguably before. And then they've got, VTT and so on. So there's a lot going on here, and it'll be interesting to see kind of where this goes. Chaosium also does have, as I recall, backing from other entities. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe this is a big investment round taking place. And, Mike has done so much, right? I mean, spearheading the 5e initial design team. So if they wanted to do a new RPG, or if they want to rethink how they approach RPGs, Mike seems like a really excellent hire for that.
Not only that, but he was also, when some of these role-playing games, including Baldur's Gate 3 was being developed, you would read on his social media, I'm flying to Europe to meet with the team over there. So there's connections there as well. So
Yeah.
if any of this IP that Chaosium owns is going to be turned into a video game, that seems to be a good connection to make there.
So the Baldur's Gate studio will now make a Chaosium RPG. Got it. Yep, confirmed.
Not saying that, just saying, there's
I mean, you never know.
more connections than
Yeah,
just the role-playing game.
for sure.
And
For sure.
hiring a VTT developer, that's a whole different angle on
Yeah.
this thing. So congratulations to those folks and good luck to Chaosium going forward with this new team. In other hiring news, Andy Collins has rejoined Wizards of the Coast. For those of you who don't know, Andy was an employee of Wizards of the Coast for over 14 years, working in various roles from magazine editor to game editor to lead designer to finally, in his final years there, the manager of RPG development and editing. So he was sort of a lead for all D&D in terms of the writing of the books and the editing of the books. So that span that he was there covers the end of second edition, all of third edition, and then most of fourth edition.
Yeah.
He also worked
Amazing.
on other projects there. And he said, in 3 weeks, I will return to Wizards of the Coast as a senior game rules specialist to help guide the new D&D virtual tabletop to reality. So it looks like they're bringing in a rules person to interface with the VTT team, which is an interesting development
Yeah.
in terms of staffing.
I mean, first, I think Andy's great from things
Mhm.
I've heard from other folks. We were just talking. His name came up when we had Rob Hainsу this week talking about 13th or last week talking about 13th Age, and we were talking about the 4E development days and where Rob was leading that effort and the role Andy played. So this is kind of really surprising, but also that he's on the VTT side is fascinating because there are people in the D&D team who really understand the D&D rules. But the VTT team needs to hire their own person who understands the rules. And that's what things happen when you pillarize everything. You suddenly have it to where you need your own hire in your group to handle things because you can't really get the answers from the other team because they're focused on their things, which aren't your things. And that your split is a very interesting thing for companies to weather. So I'm with my brain of working with a lot of companies over the years, this is the kind of thing where I go, oh, this is like what I was worried about, perhaps, right? Maybe it's fine because Andy's a smart cookie. Maybe he can interface with the D&D design team and bridge the gap, right? Create so that the pillars are talking to one another instead of siloing each other. That would be the ideal situation. But it's possible that you suddenly have Andy's flavor of 5e is guiding the VTT process, and there's a different flavor that is in the D&D design team. And if one starts making more money than the other, you can have a lot of problems with who is prominent, right? So hopefully this is a bridge hire because Andy could have that potential if everybody in those pillars works accordingly and wants that.
Yeah. And Andy does bring a bit of digital video game design professionalism to this because he also worked after leaving Wizards originally, uh, worked at Gazillion Entertainment and Undead Labs, working on projects like the Marvel Action Heroes Action MMO RPG and the game State of Decay 2. So there's that knowledge of the digital side as well that Andy brings. So, good luck. We'll see. We'll definitely be keeping an eye
Oh
on
yeah. This
the
is
differences between the role-playing game, the virtual tabletop, and then D&D Beyond thrown in there to see if there's any interplay between those and what that looks like.
I mean, I've put on my bib when I hear news like this. I'm like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yum, yum.
yum, yum, yum.
Speaking of yummy things, you can now register for your badge at GameHole Con. Teos and I will be there. along with many of our friends, running games, doing panels, playing games, partaking of the wonderful ambiance that GameHole brings. You can submit events if you're interested in running. I know that they're always looking for volunteers to run games like Adventures League content, or just
Yeah.
any company that runs games. They're generally looking for volunteers. Uh, you can submit events, get your badge, and then event registration begins in August. If you are not familiar with Gamehole Con, it is a wonderful convention taking place in Madison, Wisconsin, October 17th through 24th. I call it all the majesty and industry interaction of Gen Con, but at about 1/10 of the busyness. So you
Yeah.
can sit down and play games with, some of your favorite designers with or grab a drink at the bar with them, or
Yeah.
share a meal with them, and they're
Yeah.
generally very receptive to folks.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I couldn't like Gamehole Con much more than I do. I mean, I don't know how I would like it more. It's great, and the breadth of games that are there is fantastic. That's something I really love, where it's this feels like a small con, but offers you as good, if not way better, a chance of landing a different RPG you really wanted to try. You can
Mhm.
probably get a seat at it at Gamehole, and that's amazing.
Yep. And if you are a POC, a person of color in the tabletop industry, there is a special opportunity at Gamehole Con to attend a dinner to meet and mingle with other creators, connect with collaborators, find mentors as we grow diversity in the industry. You can, even if you self-publish, you can still apply. There's a link in our show notes, and a mix of new and experienced creators will be chosen. The dinner is free for you if you are accepted. You do need to pay your own way to Gamehole Con, but this dinner and this mix opportunity is free of charge. You can fill out the form by the 24th of June, midnight Eastern Time. And it's a Google Doc where you can put in your contact information. So it's right there in our show notes.
Yeah, I really encourage folks to do this. Gamehole, as a convention, has been doing a really great job of having really diverse panelists, having diverse people on the list of sort of invited guests that come back every year. So there is a really nice opportunity here for folks to grow what kind of a convention this is, and this is a nice way to add a mentoring role to it, side to it, which is really exciting. I'm looking forward to it. And a lot of good people are behind this effort. It's been really nice to talk to them. So I'm looking forward to being there. I'll definitely be at this event.
Nice. We are getting information on why role-playing games can spur climate action. Teos, tell us about this.
This is an article in Nature, that looked at RPGs as a way to say that solving problems collaboratively builds empathy and helps us think out of the box. It may not help us pronounce words. And the article has some interesting thoughts and cites various other studies that highlight the benefits of taking part in role-playing games, how regular players exhibit higher levels of empathy than non-players do. They tend to engage more often in pro-social behaviors. And those showing greater empathy tend to pay greater attention to pro-environmental decisions, such as using sustainable products. Deficit in empathy is often found among climate change deniers, which is interesting. So the author built a game to try to build climate awareness. And all of the article really reminded me of some of the simulations that I would do in college, where you'd see, like, can countries come together on this issue? Can people figure out how to use this land wisely when there are these three competing interests? And you all play stakeholders, and by playing those different sides, right, just artificially being given a side, you get to see how this works. Or my daughter got involved. She actually created a nonprofit that would run climate simulations using an MIT climate model for high school groups, and it allowed people to do things. Students in high school to do things like say, well, I'm playing the role of Japan, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to invest in this particular thing, right? I'm pulling this lever of the climate equation. I am, reducing my carbon emissions, or I am going to increase my solar energy or whatever. And they got to see what impacts they were and how often what they'd all come to the table with was not enough, right? And so then it lets you think about, okay, well, what do we need to do? What trade-offs are in place? And I love the thought behind this article, and I love the idea that RPGs help us be better at that. I really like that.
Yeah. My wife and I did a little talk at the local college about role-playing games in education, and she does the same thing. She teaches high school uh, American history and world history and geography. And she does these simulations all the time of you are, a serf in a medieval manor, you are a vassal, you are a lord, et cetera, et cetera. What's important to you? How does things change? And then you do that on all levels of any sort of education, and it really reinforces uh, the important trends that people need to be aware of. Whereas if you just list them off, kids can just absolutely ignore it and turn off their brains. But when they're playing it and there's something at stake in a game, they are definitely much more interested. So that Nature article is at nature.com, or you can go to the link in our show notes. Next, we have the Diana Jones Award naming the emerging designer winners. This year, they have recognized 4 emerging designers. They've awarded them each a $6,500 prize package that includes an all expenses paid trip to Gen Con. The 4 winners this year are Quinn Brander, a Cree board game and video game designer, Taylor Navarro, a Puerto Rican British RPG designer, project manager, and editor, Clarence Simpson, a half Filipino board game designer and video game software engineer, and Basil Wright, a Black and Seminole game designer. The story at Board Game Wire provides the history of the program, all the previous winners, and the finalists this year. So you can go to boardgamewire.com to see that.
Fantastic to see. Really, really glad that this has kept going on as a program. It's been a great to see the people that get these awards. Awesome. Congrats.
That is our news this week.
Yeah. Now, Shawn, I do want to mention that by the time we record, I believe there will be the launch of the Blade Runner role-playing game's latest expansion. Back a little while ago when I tried Blade Runner, I thought this is amazing. Is there more? And then they released a second adventure, and now they're releasing, I think, the third part of the adventure. The Kickstarter isn't live yet, so I can't look at the page, but it's called Replicant Rebellion, and the idea is, what if we flip things and tell the story from the other side? So you are no longer a Blade Runner in the story. You are a replicant that is, not legal for some reason, right? You're an older model, or you have broken away from society. And if you're playing that person, how does society look to you? And I think that's really a fascinating take. The adventures that we've played 2 adventures in our home group. They lead you towards this kind of a story going on. So it'll be very interesting to see how this goes. I'm excited to back that.
Awesome. When the Kickstarter launches, we will come back to it and give a little more detail. That is our news this week.